Welcome to this lecture. Now let's get to the point where we can just communicate this client to the server, which is our Kali machine. So in the previous lecture we just made this sandbox to run our backdoor on. We just detect the virtual machine and we just assign some of these stops over here. So let's get to the main part now. So what we are going to do here is we'll just define the method which is going to connect to the server. I'll just say server connect is the method. So here I'll just make the function that is going to do that connection for us. So let me just go over here. And now, so first of all, I'll just define the global, and this global will be our object, socket object. So now next thing what you need to do is this should run continuously. That means we'll just make this loop, infinite loop. Let me give the tab. And this is basically to run until the socket can connect, or basically until we get this socket object correctly. So let's use this socket object now. So let's instantiate basically. So you know how to instantiate this socket. So it is from this socket module that we imported and this socket class or the API call through this socket. So next thing is to use this socket, or basically it should be object socket, and we have to now connect, and this connection should be inside the tuple. We have seen this in the first lecture where we just made a connection between the server and a client. So you can just reference to that video if you get any confusion on this method, which is connect method. So here what you need to pass is this string host, which is the host IP address and the port number in the form of a tuple. So I'll just say string host, str host, and the next one would be your integer port, that is a port number which the server is listening to. So now we have just made a connection. So if there is an exception, there may be the exception of this socket and it should be the error. And if it is the case, let me give the tab, and I will just say something like sleep for maybe 5 seconds. So this is to wait 5 seconds to try again, because you know that this is the infinite loop. So it will just try again after this 5 seconds. Else, we'll just go to the else part. If it is the case, or if nothing is connection happens, then we'll just break. So this will be your server connect. So you could clearly see we just made a connection right over here. So next thing is we'll just get the host name, and that can be done right after this while loop. So after this while loop, I'll just make this user info variable, and here what I'm going to take is from this socket class or from the socket object, we are going to call this method which is get host name. So this is going to get us a host name, and from here now you have to get something concatenated. So first of all, let me say I want to concatenate it with maybe this code, and okay, this is the concatenation with. So now I want to concatenate it with this colon, and now what you need to add is from this platform what we just imported. If you see here, we have imported this platform module, and now let's see the platform, because we want the system of that platform. So I'll just say platform.system. It is the method of this platform module to get the system, and the next thing I want to get is the release method. So okay, let me give some spaces so as to make the information more friendly, and it should be platform and dot release method, and let me just type this one. So if you see here, this line has been already a bigger. So if I just press plus and just give this a backward slash and go to the next line, this is not going to work in the case of Notepad++. So just remember that you have to get everything written in the single line over here. So next thing is, after we just see the release, we have to now detect this sandbox, which is our method. So we have written this method, and I have told you in the previous lecture that this method is going to run in a such way that this backdoor, or basically this reverse shell that we are just making, will run on this sandboxy rather than in the actual machine. So next thing is to detect our virtual machine, and we are just calling this method over here. So next thing is again to concatenate. So next information I want to concatenate with is the environment of the username, and let's make another information over here. So first let me just give this again the comma, or maybe first quote and the comma, and again close this with the concatenation, because we are just concatenating with, basically we are just concatenating it with now the environment. So it is very important. Okay, so it is environment. Okay, this method. So we want, what we want is, we want the username of the client. So if you want that, it should be username, and this will get you the username. So we have completed this long statement, which is going to give us the string about the user information. You can see we get this platform system, we just get, or basically we just call for this detect sandboxy, which is going to load our some DLL file, and we just detect this virtual machine, we get that environment information. Next thing, what I want to do is send this information back to the user, or basically back to the server. So you know how to send this. It is done by this send method. We haven't created maybe this send method. Let me just create this first, and I'll just show you. So what I'm going to do here is, we have to encode this message before sending, because in the version that is newer version of Python, without encoding it is not possible to send the data back to the server. So I'll just say this user info. Okay, it is user info. This user info should be sent back to the user. So let's make some of these function now in order to just do these operations. So the first function I'm interested is that the function that is going to return the decoded UDF8. We have done this in the server section too, but that is not enough. We have to do in the case of this client too. So I'll make use of this anonymous function again, and I'll just say data is the argument that is passed. We want to decode that data. So if you see, this is the decode method that is going to decode your data. So it should be decoded with this UTF, okay, every time. So because what happens is, in this notepad, when I just type this double quote, it is obviously converting me to maybe this at the rate. So the keystroke is changed in this notepad plus. So what I want to do here is UTF-8 is the decoding. So let's go over here and make another function, and this function is going to decrypt the data. And if you want to decrypt, that is basically receive the data. And this is also the function that is going to receive the data that is sent from the server. And I'll just make this lambda function again, and I'll just say this is the buffer, and it will be in this object socket. So object socket is the object of our socket module, and we have this receive function that is the API call to that socket, and we'll just receive that buffer. Now next thing is to send the data. We have now received the data from the server. Next thing I want to do is send the data. So in order to send the data, we'll make use of this same lambda function. I'm going to say it is a data, and now it is the object socket that is going to have this send method, and it is the data. So now we have already completed these some functions. So what this is going to do is, this is going to decode, and again this is going to decode, and the next thing is this, and this is going to receive the data, this is going to send the data. So let's call now this function, and the function I want to call is this server connect. So I'll just say server connect should be called here. Now we have completed the process in order to connect back to the server. So let's do something that is going to have the connections, and let's do with this while loop. So I'll just say while true, this is the infinite loop, and let me just go over here and try, because maybe we are going to get some error, then it will just catch over here. So inside this I'll make another infinite loop. Let's go back here, and the first thing I want to get is the string data, that is to receive the data from the server, because we want to execute something in the client. That means we have to get something from the server in order to execute that for the client. So I'll just say int buff is the data that is to be received. So next thing is integer data, or let me say this same data, and that is to be decoded, because it was encoded in the case of the server. We have to decode with this UTF-8 function that we just created over here. This was the same UTF-8 decoding technique that we used to do. So I'll just say string data should be decoded now. Now let's check what is this str data. So this is important. So if this str data is okay, let's go back to our Kali Linux and see what am I talking about. So if you see here, this was our backdoor that we use, and basically this has this list connection method. And now if you can see here, this close method has sent, this is the connection, and this has sent to client, that is the information encoding, that is exit. Basically it has encoded this exit message and has sent this message back to the client. That means we can now check that if that message is exit or not. If the message that is sent by the user, or basically by the client, or not the client, it is obviously the server, which is our Kali Linux. If the Kali Linux send that exit message from there, and basically we can see that this receive method is going to get that data for us, and we have decoded it in the client. And next thing I want to do is, if this is the case, you have to close your connection, that is using this object socket, and we have this close method to close it, and I want to just exit from the system. That is done by this system exit. So we have successfully completed the first syntax. We haven't covered anything about maybe the message or maybe some backdoors like screenshot, but now this is the simple skeleton where we can just now write some of the payload. So before that we have to accept, or basically handle the exception if we just get any. So if there is exception, maybe that should be socket dot error, and if the socket, or basically if the server closes without warning, without giving warning, then this exception will be catch over here. And first of all, what we need to do in that case is we have to close that socket, because there may be the chance that server will close without giving any warning, and in that case we have to also delete that object, and that should be done with this delete object socket. And the next thing is we have to call again this server connect method, which will just again try back to connect to the server. So let's see what we just did here. So it was easy coding over here. We just saw how mutex work, or what is the use of this mutex. We saw how this sandboxy work. We saw this detecting the virtual machine, and we just coded here that is the server connect. So we have already seen how to connect in the previous lecture, that is using this socket module, giving this tuple in the form of string host, which is the server host IP address, and the port which this server will be listening. And the next thing is getting this user information. We are just getting the data with these lambda functions, and receiving and sending the data. And here we are just getting some data from the user. If this is the exit data sent by the server, then we'll just close that connection and exit from the system. Otherwise we'll just try back to connect to the server. So this is the coding we just did here. So let me save this first, and let's go back to our Kali Linux, and let's make that server. And basically this is our backdoor.py which we just made. We don't have anything over here because we don't have any backdoor like screenshot or sending message to the client, or just making some movement, or basically making some command executed on the machines. That is not yet covered, but we'll just cover in the next lecture, upcoming lecture. That will be more interesting lecture. But for now you can see we have this method which is list connections. So we can just try to see if this connections works or not. So let's run this first. So that is running here, and I'll just run here, that is this backdoor.py, which is the same file over here. So I'll just make this. So it is saying listening on a port 4444, which is the message that we just have here. That should be right. Okay, where is that message? It should be in the main menu. So it is right here. Okay, it is not right here. It should be where is that? Okay, this is the socket bind. Basically it is just listening to that port. Now we have to execute this main menu. So before that, it will just listen to this port and just listen for the incoming connections. So it is basically listening for the incoming connections. So let's go back to our Windows machine. We have saved this file. First of all, you have to save this file, and let's see if this gives any error. So let's go that and here this is basically stored in the desktop. That is my backdoor. And now let me just open my CMD. Let me just go to this desktop, and now I want to run this file using the Python command, and that file is backdoor.py. So let me hit enter, and now let's go back to our server, which is this Kali Linux. It has shown us information. Say this is the information, and we have also got this message of desktop. You can clearly see over here we have this desktop message, which is the same machine that is right over here. This is the machine, and we just get the information over here saying that this is the IP addresses this is running on. Because if you see, I have formatted in a such way that I'll just get that information. Okay, where is that? It is okay, here is that. So this was the information. Connection has established. 0 was basically the IP address, and the 1 which we just have here was the desktop. So I have already told you before that these addresses will contain some of the IP addresses, and if you just type 1 over here, that will be your port name. So basically we don't want port name, we just want the desktop name. That means we just get the IP addresses and the desktop what we are running. So next thing is we have to run the command. So if you see here this double arrow, so this double arrow was from here. This was the main menu thus printed. So this main menu was printed now, and it is just getting us the input saying that let me just get some input from here. So if I just say that I don't want to type either this L, which is the command which will just list our connection, or this --x which will close our connection. Instead, if I just type something random or something gibberish, it is going to give us this menu help, because now this else part will run and it will just print that invalid choice, please try again message, and this menu help will execute. That means this will just execute again, and this will just give us any help information. So let's try that. So if I hit enter, then you could see that it is invalid choice, please try again, and menu help was executed, and that means we are just getting this information again in the format that will help the client to execute that in this server. So let's see if I just run this command. That let me just make this bigger. Let me see that now we have to run this L command. So if you see here that if I just go back, and you can see in this main menu, if the string choice that is entered by the user L is basically, if this is L, then it will just list the connection. That means we have to call now list connection, that is this method. And we have taken a whole lot of time to explain this list connection method, and basically this will give your IP address, port name, PC name, OS name. So let's see if this works or not. So let's see, that is, let's list this L, and let me just hit enter. You could see this has now formatted, and basically it has shown some of the misplace, because this name should be over here, and OS is basically this Windows 10. You could see it has shown this virtual machine, and it is perfectly correct because I'm on the virtual machine. It has shown this port it is communicating to, and basically you can see that this is the IP addresses. So that means that this is our connection. So you can clearly see this is our list of connections that is available, and now you can also close that connection, because if you see here in the main menu, you have just written a code that is saying if the inputted from the user command is --x, it will just close. That means this method will close and this method will call, and this will close our connection. So let's see if this works or not. So I'll just say x, then if I hit enter, it is saying process finish. Let's go back to our Windows machine, and you could see now the process is done. So no longer this Python is executing. So this is the way which we have already seen in the previous lecture, how to just communicate between the server and a client by this simple code. Now in the next lecture we have done nothing. Till now we haven't executed any command in this Kali Linux, or basically we haven't executed any command in the Windows machine. We haven't got any of the important features, or basically running the command and getting a screenshot or running the message. Anything interesting part like that should be covered in the next upcoming lecture. But for now you can see the information listed over here of the client machine that is communicated with the server. So this will be wrap for this lecture. From the next lecture we'll just make this backdoor much more advanced than before. So see you in the next one.